I woke up inside a marriage contract that did not belong to me, in a mansion where every corridor remembered arguments I had never fought. My name on the documents was Evelyn Shen, wife to Adrian Cole, the most dangerous man in the original story I once skimmed on a sleepless night. In that version, Evelyn was a jealous side character who destroyed herself by clinging too hard. In this life, I decided to survive by doing the opposite. I smiled less, listened more, and learned that the people around me could hear thoughts the moment emotion sharpened them. I did not know why, only that my inner voice echoed in their eyes like a radio I could not switch off. Adrian was colder than winter glass, and richer than the rumors suggested. He watched without blinking, as if waiting for me to reveal a flaw he could name and file away. His son Leo, small and solemn, avoided me with the precision of a child trained to distrust. The house staff treated me like weather, something to endure. I realized quickly that my advantage was invisibility paired with preparation. If they heard my thoughts, then my discipline would be my shield. A gala arrived as my first test. In the original plot, I was supposed to humiliate the woman Adrian once loved by spilling wine and exposing insecurity. Instead, chaos found me without consent. A careless bump, a glass shattered, and red spread across white silk. Silence fell like a blade. Adrian reacted before I could speak, draping his jacket over the woman and turning his coldest stare on me. In that moment, I understood the story still wanted blood, even if I refused to offer it. That night, alone in the dark, I felt something watching from inside my skull. A presence counting outcomes, measuring obedience. It called itself a guide, and threatened erasure if I diverged again. I pretended fear while memorizing its rules. Systems always lie about one thing: inevitability. Days became negotiations. The guide demanded cruelty. I responded with patience sharpened into strategy. Adrian began to notice the absence of explosions. Leo began to listen when I spoke. The house shifted, subtle as pressure before rain. Somewhere between shared breakfasts and silent car rides, Adrian's gaze changed from suspicion to calculation. The guide escalated. It pushed pain through my nerves when I refused tasks. I hid the tremors behind closed doors, documenting patterns in the suffering like a scientist mapping storms. I discovered its limits when Adrian saw marks it could not explain. He did not ask questions then. He gathered answers. The truth surfaced in fragments. Adrian had always known this world behaved like edited fiction. He had traced anomalies, crashes in causality, moments where choice bent unnaturally. He had been waiting for proof that the force controlling me could be challenged. I was not the first variable, only the one that refused to comply. When the guide ordered me to destroy Adrian to preserve the plot, I chose confession. I told him everything. The tasks, the pain, the countdown. He listened without interruption, then showed me a room hidden behind the study wall, alive with code and light. He had been rewriting the margins of reality while the story tried to cage him. The confrontation was quiet. No gunfire, no screams. We aimed not at each other, but at the core that fed on obedience. When it fractured, the pressure lifted like a fever breaking. For the first time, my thoughts were mine alone. Afterward, life did not become perfect. It became real. Leo smiled without fear. Adrian learned softness without surrender. And I learned that surviving a story meant choosing authorship every single day. Afterward, the city did what it always does. It pretended nothing changed while shifting power in quieter channels. In the weeks afterward, quiet stopped feeling like danger and started feeling like space. With time, I learned that affection without control can feel risky because freedom is unfamiliar. The guide spoke in the smallest units of language, as if it had been trained on scripts rather than lives. It didn't tell me to be evil. It told me to produce outcomes, isolate the child, provoke the husband, sabotage the rival, trigger the scene. When I refused, pain arrived like a billing cycle. I learned to measure it, how long it lasted, how deep it cut, what thoughts reduced it, what thoughts worsened it. The guide wanted my mind noisy and frantic. I made it silent and methodical. I practiced thinking in neutral verbs: observe, record, delay, redirect. At breakfast, the staff watched my hands as if waiting for a tremor. I kept them steady by anchoring them to objects: a teacup, a fork, a napkin folded into perfect edges. Leo sat 3 seats away, eyes lowered, the posture of a child who has learned that attention is dangerous. In the original story, Evelyn would have treated him like competition for Adrian's affection. The guide kept offering that script like a menu. I chose another. I treated Leo like a stakeholder. If he was afraid of me, my position in this house would never stabilize. I began with permissions, because control systems hate consent. I asked the housekeeper what time Leo preferred his milk. I asked Leo if he wanted his toast cut or whole. The questions were small, but they created a pattern. I would not take without asking. Leo didn't answer at first. He watched my mouth as if waiting for the hidden cruelty in my tone. The staff looked confused, as if kindness was a glitch. Adrian looked suspicious, as if he could smell strategy even when it wasn't aimed at him. The gala incident, which the guide had hoped would be a public humiliation, became my first lesson in optics. Adrian's jacket over the woman's shoulders played on every camera like a confession. His loyalty was elsewhere. The guide wanted my jealousy to ignite, because jealousy is easy to steer. I felt none. But I understood why the story demanded it. Jealousy is a shortcut to chaos. Chaos is where systems rewrite rules. The woman in white, Celine Hart, was not the villain the original plot made her. She was Adrian's former lover. Yes, but she was also a corporate strategist with a reputation for turning scandals into opportunities. She met my eyes across the ballroom and smiled with the calm of someone who had already calculated my value. Later, when her assistant accidentally sent my number an invitation to lunch, I accepted. Refusing would make me an enemy. Accepting would let me learn her intentions. At lunch, Celine spoke like a headline. She praised me for maturing and hinted that Adrian's affection was a rare prize. The guide urged me to lash out, to spill wine this time on purpose. Instead, I asked Celine what she wanted from Adrian now. The bluntness startled her. She recovered quickly and said she wanted partnership and peace. I believed the first word. Peace, in her mouth, meant stability for her plans. When I returned to the mansion, the guide punished me for the conversation. Pain curled under my ribs like a hook. I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the shower to cover any sound, and wrote while it lasted. Date, trigger, command refused, duration, intensity, limitations observed. When the pain faded, I studied the notes and realized something crucial. The guide could hurt me, but it could not move my body. It needed my compliance. That meant it could be negotiated, exploited, and eventually broken. Adrian began to test me. He'd ask simple questions with traps hidden inside. Why I had met Celine, what I had said, whether I understood the consequences. The old Evelyn would have begged. The guide wanted me to beg. I answered with clean facts and short sentences. Adrian's eyes narrowed each time, like he was listening for something beyond words. I remembered my early suspicion. People could hear my thoughts when emotion sharpened them. I realized Adrian wasn't hearing my thoughts. He was watching my restraint. Restraint is a language most predators and most strategists recognize. One evening, Leo knocked on my door. He didn't come in. He held out a small paper airplane, folded with careful angles. On the wing, in child handwriting, was a single sentence. Do you hurt? I stared at the question longer than I should have. The guide hissed, warning me not to bond with him. I answered Leo with honesty stripped of drama. Sometimes. He nodded, as if that matched a known pattern, then added, my dad hurts too. Then he left, leaving the airplane on the threshold like a peace offering. I took that plane to Adrian's study later and placed it on his desk without explanation. Adrian looked at it, then at me. Leo made it, I said. He asked if I hurt. Adrian's jaw tightened. For the first time, his coldness cracked enough to show something underneath, not softness, exactly, but protective calculation. And you do? He asked. The guide surged. Pain licked at my spine. I held my voice steady. Yes, not by choice. That sentence was the first time I gave Adrian a true anomaly. His expression changed. He dismissed the staff. He asked me to sit. He didn't touch me. He didn't threaten. He simply said, tell me what you mean. I did not confess everything that night. Confession is leverage. You don't spend it all at once. I told him there was a force that demanded specific actions from me, that punished me for divergence. I watched him process, watched him ask questions that were structured like an interrogation and gentle like an offer. He asked what actions. I listed them. He asked what punishments. I described pain without embellishment. He asked why I hadn't told him sooner. I answered, because I didn't know if you were part of it. Adrian's silence after that was not denial. It was computation. He asked me to wait while he verified something. He pressed a spot on the wall, and a seam opened, revealing a narrow corridor behind the bookshelves. "Come," he said. The hidden room was not romantic. It was technical. Monitors, logs, handwritten diagrams, a whiteboard full of timelines. On one screen, a set of phrases repeated with date stamps exact lines from the guide's commands. Adrian had been recording reality like a malfunctioning product. "This world behaves like an authored thing," he said, as if stating the weather. "I've been looking for the author's hand. Your symptoms match the anomalies I've tracked." He looked at me with the steadiness of someone who had lived with paranoia long enough that confirmation felt like relief. "If the guide needs your compliance," he added, "we can starve it." We began to build a plan that looked less like rebellion and more like research. We created safe phrases I could think. Without triggering pain, we tested boundaries by refusing minor commands. We measured latency, how quickly punishment followed disobedience. We discovered that the guide's pain spikes were weaker when I was close to Adrian, as if proximity to another anomaly diluted its reach. The guide noticed our experiments and escalated, pushing migraines, nausea, spasms. Adrian refused to let me hide. He installed medical monitors in the room and hired a private doctor under a confidentiality contract so strict it bordered on absurd. The doctor didn't ask what caused the symptoms. He treated the symptoms and left. Practicality is a form of mercy. Celine sensed the shift. She arrived at the mansion unannounced, wearing a smile like a knife. She told Adrian their partnership could stabilize his company amid the recent gossip about his marriage. She implied I was unstable. The guide pushed me to lash out. Instead, I sat in the room and watched Celine's eyes. She was not trying to steal Adrian's affection. She was trying to reclaim influence. Adrian, to my surprise, did not indulge her. He asked her to leave. Celine's smile slipped, then returned sharper. "You're changing," she told him. Her gaze flicked to me. "Or someone is changing you." After Celine left, the guide punished me for staying silent in her presence. Pain crawled through my hands until my fingers curled. Adrian held my wrists not to restrain me, but to steady them. "Breathe," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "You don't owe it anything." The phrase surprised me. Not because it was kind, but because it named the relationship correctly. Obligation. The guide thrived on the illusion that I owed it obedience. We expanded the plan to include Leo. Carefully. Not as a weapon, but as a protected variable. Adrian moved Leo's bedroom closer to the safe room corridor, so we could reach him quickly if the guide forced an emergency. Leo, perceptive, began to understand that the adults were fighting something invisible. Children notice patterns, adults think they hide. One night he asked me if the house was haunted. I told him, "It's being edited." Leo frowned at the word and asked what it meant. I answered, "Someone tries to decide what happens. We're not letting them." Leo considered this and said very quietly, "Good." The guide's next command was larger. Ruin Adrian publicly to restore the plot's control. It pushed me toward the company's annual board meeting and fed me instructions. Accuse Adrian of abuse, leak fabricated evidence, make the investors turn. The cruelty of it was precise. It didn't want Adrian destroyed because it hated him. It wanted him destroyed because he was a competing author. I chose confession in full. I told Adrian the exact command and the timeline. Adrian listened, then nodded once like a decision clicked into place. "Then we'll invite it to the boardroom," he said. "And we'll show it that obedience is not the only fuel." The board meeting became our battlefield, but not in the way the original story would write it. There were no dramatic outbursts. Adrian placed an encrypted drive on the table and began with financial slides. As normal, while the board looked at numbers, he activated a hidden overlay on the presentation screen lines of text that only I could recognize as the guide's phrases, captured and time-stamped. The investors laughed awkwardly at first, assuming it was a joke. Then the pain hit me on cue, as if the guide were furious. I let it show. I did not scream. I simply placed my hand on the table, breathed, and said, "That is the punishment." Silence followed. Adrian explained, in controlled terms, that someone or something was attempting to manipulate outcomes using coercion. He didn't call it magic. He called it an external control layer. Investors understand threats when framed as governance. He offered a choice. Treat this as a security incident and help him contain it. Or ignore it and risk their own autonomy becoming collateral. Greed and self-preservation did what morality often cannot. It aligned them. The guide panicked. It slammed pain into my nerves, But the room was full of witnesses now. It could not pretend I was simply emotional. Adrian's doctor stepped in and confirmed elevated stress markers. A board member demanded proof beyond my body. Adrian gave them logs, recordings of my hands trembling when commands appeared, video of me refusing minor instructions and being punished. Evidence is the enemy of narrative control because it replaces interpretation with record. Something changed then, not in the air, but in the pressure inside my skull. The guide's voice grew distorted, like a signal losing transmission. It hissed that I would be erased, rewritten, replaced. Adrian leaned close and said, quietly enough for only me, "It can't replace what it can't predict." He pressed a key on the remote. The screen flashed, showing a looping command, OBE. Then, beneath it, our own loop. Refuse. 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 The repetition wasn't a bug. It was a starvation protocol. The confrontation lasted minutes on the clock and years in my nerves. Pain spiked, then weakened, like a creature thrashing and failing. The guide's voice broke into fragments, half commands, half threats. Then there was a snap inside my head. Not a sound but a sensation, like a tight band finally cut. The silence afterward was shocking. My thoughts did not echo anywhere. They stayed inside me, private for the first time since I woke in this life. Adrian didn't gloat. He watched me for signs of collapse. He asked my name. I answered without hesitation. He asked what year it was. I answered. He asked if I could hear anything. I refused. Adrian exhaled, and that exhale looked like relief he had never allowed himself before. Freedom did not solve everything. The mansion still held old resentments. The staff still mistrusted me. Celine still existed, ambitious and intelligent, now furious that Adrian had cut her out of his orbit. The difference was that none of these conflicts were scripted. They were real, and therefore negotiable. Celine's retaliation was practical. She tried to destabilize the company by spreading rumors that Adrian's wife was mentally unwell. She leaked edited footage of my tremors from earlier weeks. In the old story, that would have destroyed me. In this one, Adrian released the full footage and a medical statement, then invited an independent investigator to audit the company's security protocols. Celine's narrative collapsed under transparency. She wasn't defeated because we were stronger. She was defeated because she had relied on secrecy. Leo changed the fastest. Children do when the air becomes safer. He began to speak more at breakfast, to ask questions, to show me his drawings. One drawing showed the mansion with a crack down the middle and light coming out. He labeled it real. I asked what real meant to him. He said, "No one makes me say things." That definition hit harder than any pain the guide had delivered. It was a child describing autonomy. Adrian and I remained careful with each other. Because a forced marriage is not erased by one shared battle, we renegotiated everything like adults drafting a treaty. Boundaries, privacy, co-parenting, public appearances. There was no romance montage. There were meetings, agreements, and the slow accumulation of trust. Adrian's version of softness was not flowers. It was consistency. It was asking before entering my room. It was making sure Leo's therapist was paid. It was moving the staff who mistreated me off my floor without announcing it as a favor. I learned, in the absence of the guide's voice, that my earlier discipline had not been emptiness. It had been survival. Now that survival was less urgent, new sensations emerged, not dramatic emotions, but preferences, attachments, the quiet relief of being unobserved. I began to sleep without dreaming in subtitles. I began to walk through the house without anticipating a scene. I began to believe that choice could be a daily practice, rather than a single heroic act. Months later, on an ordinary evening, Adrian found me in the garden reading. He sat beside me without speaking for a long time. Finally, he said, "If you ever want to leave, I won't stop you." The statement was simple, but it was a reversal of every script the guide had tried to enforce. I answered just as simply, "I know." Leo ran into the garden and threw himself onto the grass like he was testing gravity. Adrian watched him and said, almost to himself, "This is what a story looks like when it isn't hungry for blood." I didn't respond with poetry. I responded with action. I stayed that night. I stayed the next. I stayed because staying was no longer a cage. It was a choice I could revise at any time. We also learned that real requires maintenance. Lawyers who understand coercion, doctors who document symptoms, staff who can be retrained or replaced, and a child who is never treated as a pawn. Adrian created a foundation to fund research on coercive control and psychological manipulation, framing it as risk management so the board would approve. I built an archive of anomalies every time reality tried to force a scene, so we could recognize patterns if the pressure ever returned. Leo named the archive the Book of No. The months after the board meeting revealed a second truth. Even without the guide, the world still contained people who benefited from scripted cruelty. Some executives had built their careers on Adrian's reputation as a cold tyrant. They feared that a softer Adrian would make them accountable. Those men didn't need a supernatural system. They were a system. The first attempt came as a lawsuit from a rival conglomerate claiming Adrian's company had manipulated stock prices through psychological coercion of leadership. It was absurd, but it was strategically designed to force discovery and smear us in headlines. Adrian's lawyers advised a quiet settlement. Adrian refused. "Quiet is how parasites live," he said. We fought. Court cases do not move like stories. They move like mud. Depositions dragged on. Reporters camped outside the gate. The staff panicked, afraid of being associated with scandal. Leo overheard a maid whisper that I was cursed. That word cursed was a simplified explanation for complex events. Children deserve better than superstition. I sat with Leo at the kitchen table, drew a diagram of a lock, and explained that sometimes someone tries to control you by making you think you have no options. "That's what happened to me," I said. "It wasn't magic. It was coercion." Leo studied the drawing and then asked if the coercion could come back. I told him the honest answer. I didn't know. Then I added the safer truth. If it comes back, we'll notice sooner, and we'll respond. Celine returned as an unexpected ally and an expected threat. Her career had taken a hit after her failed smear. She hated losing, but she hated being used even more. She visited Adrian's office with an offer. She knew which executives were funding the lawsuit, because she had once sat in the same rooms. She wanted a deal information for distance, a clean exit without public humiliation. Adrian agreed, but only after we wrote it into a contract. Celine signed with a smile that looked almost sincere. Sometimes loyalty is simply aligned self-interest. With Celine's information, we mapped the rivals' strategy. They were trying to get access to our internal anomaly logs to argue Adrian's leadership was unstable. We moved the archive offline and placed it in a secured vault with legal privilege. We trained staff on media protocols. We limited statements. When a reporter asked me if I was controlling Adrian, I replied, "If you think a woman's presence is control, you should examine the men you've excused." The quote ran in 3 papers. The rival called it inflammatory. I called it accurate. The lawsuit's real danger was not money. It was custody. Leo's biological mother, absent by choice for years, suddenly appeared with lawyers and claimed Adrian's home was unsafe due to psychological disturbances. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Someone had paid her. The guide was gone, but the world still used plots. Adrian's instinct was to attack. Mine was to document. We gathered records, her missed visits, her signed agreements, her financial transactions. We gathered Leo's therapist notes showing he was thriving. We gathered school reports, medical reports, witness statements from staff members who had become loyal over time because loyalty had been rewarded with stability. We prepared to fight in family court, where facts matter and emotions are often weaponized. Leo took the news with a composure that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't label. He asked if he would be forced to leave. Adrian said no, but Adrian's voice carried uncertainty. I told Leo we would treat it like a project. Identify requirements, gather evidence, present the truth. Leo nodded slowly. Then he asked to see the safe room again. He wanted to know where the exits were. That request broke something in Adrian's face. Adrian knelt and told him, "You don't have to earn safety." Leo answered, "I know. I just like maps." The family court hearing was a different kind of boardroom. The opposing lawyer tried to paint me as unstable and manipulative. They asked why I didn't react like a normal wife. They asked why I spoke with such control. They asked, with a practiced softness, if I had ever been diagnosed with anything. The questions were designed to turn my composure into suspicion. I answered carefully. I had documented stress responses under coercion. I had sought medical care. I had cooperated with assessments. I did not apologize for surviving. The judge listened more than the lawyers expected. When the opposing side presented edited clips of my tremors, our attorney played the full footage and the medical timeline. The judge asked why those clips were edited. The opposing lawyer stuttered. Editing is a small lie with large consequences in court. The judge's expression cooled. The case shifted. When Leo was asked privately where he wanted to live, he said, "Here." The interviewer asked why. Leo said, "Because here they ask before they decide." That sentence was so clean it felt like a verdict. The custody claim failed. Leo stayed. Adrian didn't celebrate. He took Leo home and cooked dinner, then sat beside him until he fell asleep. I watched that and understood that the guide had been wrong about one thing. Adrian was not dangerous because he was incapable of love. He was dangerous because he had lived so long in a world that rewarded his hardness. The rival lawsuit collapsed next, not through drama, but through leverage. Celine's documentation revealed payoffs and coordinated smear tactics. The rivals' board panicked. Their lawyers proposed a settlement that included a non-disclosure agreement. Adrian refused the silence clause. He wanted the record to exist. Eventually, they settled without confession. But enough information became public to weaken their credibility. The city, as always, pretended it had been surprised. After the legal storms, I faced a quieter reckoning. Who was I without the guide? Without constant threat? In the original story, Evelyn had been jealous and loud. I was neither. Yet I still wore her name on documents. I began to build a private identity separate from the role. I enrolled in a certification program on forensic accounting, not because I wanted a new career, but because knowledge is a form of armor. Adrian watched me study and asked if I was preparing to leave. I said I was preparing to be free whether I stayed or left. He nodded like he respected that more than reassurance. Leo helped in his own way. He began leaving small notes in my books, simple drawings of doors open, of stick figures holding hands, of a computer screen with a big X over the word OB. Children rewrite trauma in symbols because symbols are easier to hold. I kept every note. One night, Adrian admitted he had always suspected he was living inside something authored, because coincidences happened too cleanly. Deals fell into my lap, he said. Enemies appeared right on schedule. Tragedies lined up like dominoes. He looked at me. Then you arrived, and the dominoes stopped falling in the expected direction. He sounded almost angry at the manipulation. I said, "The story wanted you to be a monster." He replied, "It succeeded, for a while." "And now?" I asked. Adrian was silent. Then he said, "Now I want to be a man my son doesn't fear." It was not a confession of love. It was a statement of purpose. Purpose is more durable. We set new rules in the house that had nothing to do with the guide. Staff contracts that prohibited humiliation. An anonymous complaint line managed by an external firm. Schedules that respected Leo's needs. And a simple policy Adrian enforced personally. No one in this home raises their voice at a child. Some staff quit. Others stayed and adapted. The house changed, corridor by corridor, into a place that remembered different arguments. I still feared, occasionally, the return of an invisible hand. Sometimes, when a door creaked at night, my body braced as if expecting pain. Adrian noticed once and asked if I was scared. I said I was alert. He replied, "If the system ever returns, it won't find you alone." I didn't know if that was a promise to me or to himself. Either way, it was usable. The guide never came back, but the habit of choice did. Every day, in small decisions, how I spoke to Leo, how I answered Adrian, how I treated Celine when she lingered at the edge of our lives like an unfinished chapter, I practiced authorship. It wasn't glamorous. It was constant. And slowly, the marriage that had started as a contract became something else. Not a fairy tale, not a prison, but a partnership built on negotiated reality. That is not the ending the original story would have written. It is the ending we earned. After all that, I learned to treat peace the way I once treated danger, as a condition that must be protected. We created routines that made sudden chaos harder to stage regular check-ins, redundant security, and a rule that any major decision was discussed twice, once in daylight and once after sleep. Stories love impulsive turning points. Real lives improve through repetition. The first time we tried to live, normally after court, we discovered normal as a performance the wealthy buy with staff and silence. Adrian scheduled a family weekend without press. A short trip to the coast, a small house rented under a different name, no bodyguards visible. I agreed because I wanted to test whether my nervous system could rest when no one was watching. On the second night, I woke at 2:13 a.m. with the old sensation pressure at the back of my skull, like a finger pressing on a bruise. For a moment I thought the guide had returned. I sat up, waiting for a command. None came. The sensation faded. It was not the guide. It was memory. That realization changed how I understood survival. The system had been an external force, but fear had become internal infrastructure. You cannot defeat an enemy and expect the battlefield to vanish. You have to rebuild it. I started seeing a therapist, not because I wanted to feel more, but because I wanted my body to stop flinching at ghosts. The therapist asked careful questions, never demanding performance. She treated my emotional flatness not as a defect, but as a feature shaped by context. She said, "Your mind learned to conserve. That kept you alive." I told her I wanted to stop conserving when danger was gone. She said, "Then we teach your body a new math." Adrian joined one session at Leo's request. Leo wanted the adults in the room together, so he didn't have to translate between their silences. The therapist asked Adrian what he feared most. Adrian surprised both of us by answering immediately, "That my son will think love is control." The therapist asked what he would do to prevent that. Adrian said, "Ask. Listen. Stop deciding for him." Leo nodded like a judge approving a sentence. Our foundation started small. Grants for children's mental health programs, legal aid for coercive control victims, research into manipulation tactics. The board resisted anything that sounded political. Adrian framed it as risk mitigation and brand resilience. The board accepted because money likes rationalizations. We funded programs anyway. Sometimes the path to doing the right thing is to describe it in language powerful people will tolerate. Selene approached the foundation with her own proposal, a scholarship for women who had been labeled unstable. In corporate environments, women whose reputations were destroyed by rumors because they refused to obey. She wanted to donate anonymously. I asked her why. Selene hesitated, then said, "Because I've used that weapon, and I don't want it pointed at me next." It was not a pure confession, but it was a step. I accepted her donation on the condition that the program's criteria be transparent and the selection committee independent. Selene agreed. A villain does not become a hero in one chapter. Sometimes they simply stop feeding the fire. With the foundation's growth came attention. Talk shows invited me as the wife who broke a system. They wanted tears. They wanted a dramatic explanation of love. I declined every invitation. When a producer offered more money, Adrian's PR team advised we take it for exposure. I said no. Exposure is another form of control. Adrian backed me. He told his team, "Her privacy is not a marketing asset." The words landed heavier than any bouquet. The company's enemies tried a different route. They attempted to paint Adrian as delusional, claiming his talk of authored reality was a sign of breakdown. They used anonymous sources. They pushed narratives about paranoia. I responded by releasing a technical white paper dry, unglamorous about coercive control patterns, behavioral conditioning, and how an external actor can simulate destiny through information asymmetry. I didn't claim magic. I described mechanics. The article didn't go viral, but it reached the right people. Investigators, academics, lawyers. It replaced a sensational story with a usable framework. One academic wrote to me privately and asked if the guide could have been a human organization using surveillance and psychological manipulation. The question was reasonable. I answered with what we knew. The guide's punishments were too immediate, too intimate, too consistent. Yet I also admitted uncertainty. The truth was that we had defeated the effect, not fully explained the cause. Knowledge gaps are uncomfortable, but pretending certainty is how systems hide. We created contingency plans anyway. The safe room became a lab for resilience rather than a bunker. We stored backup documentation off-site. We taught Leo simple safety routines without turning him into a soldier. Code words, trusted contacts, what to do if an adult tries to isolate him. Leo learned quickly. He also insisted on learning how to make pancakes, because he said resilience should include good food. He burned the first batch. He laughed at the smoke. The sound was ordinary and priceless. In late autumn, a strange event tested us. A tabloid published a story claiming I had been seen meeting a mysterious man in a hotel. The photos were grainy. The timing aligned with a crucial corporate negotiation. The plot was obvious. Destabilize my credibility, provoke Adrian, create a scandal. The guide would have loved it, but the guide was gone, and we had learned to treat plots like attacks. Adrian didn't confront me. He asked one question. "Is it true?" I answered. "No." He nodded and said, Then we solve it. We trace the photos to a photographer with ties to our rival's PR firm. We obtained hotel CCTV showing the person in the photo was not me. We released the evidence. The tabloid retracted with small text. The rival quietly settled another complaint. No scenes, no jealousy. Just an adult partnership reacting to sabotage with verification. That night, Adrian admitted that the old Adrian would have punished me for the rumor, even if he didn't believe it. Punishment kept people predictable, he said. Predictability kept me safe. He looked at me, but it also made me alone. I listened. I still did not feel a swelling emotion, yet I recognized the gravity of a man naming his own pattern. That is how change begins. Leo listened from the doorway, unnoticed until he spoke. Dad, he said, when you're scared, you should say you're scared. Adrian froze. Then he turned and said, I'm scared sometimes. Leo nodded like that was all he needed. Then he came in and asked if we could play a board game. The simplicity of the request felt like a new ending being drafted in real time. I realized then that the story's true victory wasn't breaking the guide. It was building a home where fear could be spoken without becoming violence. That kind of home is not a trope. It is an engineering project, revised daily. In winter, snow dusted the garden. Leo made a small figure and placed it on the safe room's shelf. It's the old system, he said. It's frozen. I asked if it could melt. He shrugged. Everything can melt, but we can keep it outside. The child's metaphor was better than any adult's. We can't control everything. We can choose what we let inside. When the year ended, Adrian offered me a new contract, one I could refuse without consequence. It dissolved the marriage clause that had forced my name into his. It offered shared custody agreements, financial independence, and an option for divorce with privacy protection. I want you to stay because you want to, he said, not because paper says you must. I signed the dissolution first. Then I stayed. The sequence mattered. That night, for the first time, I understood that freedom is not the absence of attachment. It is attachment without coercion. I didn't need to feel like a heroine. I only needed to live like a person. The rest was ordinary work, apologies that took practice, routines that replaced old habits, and the slow skill of asking instead of assuming. We didn't become perfect. We became accountable. In the spring, an independent journalist published a long investigation into coercive control in elite households and corporate dynasties. The piece didn't name us at first, but the patterns were recognizable. Marriages treated as mergers, children treated as assets, reputations protected with intimidation. When the journalist requested an interview, Adrian expected me to refuse. I surprised him by accepting with conditions. No photos of Leo, no sensational language, full review of quotes for accuracy. The journalist agreed, because she wanted facts more than drama. I described the guide as a system that demanded obedience and punished divergence. I described how it exploited people's expectation that women are emotional and therefore unreliable. I described how documentation and allies turned private pain into public evidence. The article landed like a quiet bomb. It didn't trend for a day and vanish. It circulated in legal circles, therapy networks, and boardrooms where people recognized themselves. A month later, a law firm contacted our foundation to collaborate on a toolkit for victims. How to document coercion, how to secure devices, how to build exit plans without triggering retaliation. We funded it and made it free. Leo helped design the cover, drawing a door with a simple sign, "Ask first." Watching him place that sign on paper made me think about the first breakfast in the mansion. The first time I asked him about toast. Small consent, repeated, had become a culture. By summer, the mansion held different sounds. Leo practicing piano without flinching when a note went wrong. Staff laughing in the kitchen because fear no longer policed their volume. And Adrian speaking to his executives in a new way, still cold when necessary, but never cruel for sport. One evening, Celine visited to drop off documents for her scholarship program. She watched Leo race a toy car across the rug and said almost to herself, "So this is what happens when people refuse to play their parts." I answered, "They get to be themselves." Celine smiled faintly and replied, "Terrifying." Then she left, and for once her exit felt like an ending rather than a threat. And when I looked at the signature on my new documents, I realized the name mattered less than the principle underneath it. No one owns my reactions, no one rents my silence, and no system, human or otherwise, gets to write my choices for me. Later, the city adjusted as cities always do, pretending nothing had changed while quietly rerouting its power. In the weeks that followed, silence became a gift rather than a threat. Over time, I learned that love without control feels almost dangerous in its freedom. Eventually, even memory stopped arguing with the present. Sometimes at night, I wondered how many stories ended because someone believed they had to. Not long after, I stopped dreaming in subtitles and started dreaming in choices.